News 12 Sports with Pat Murphy.
Great news regarding Bills tight end Kevin Everett. He moved his arms and legs today. And doctors now believe that's the wrong video, by the way. That is not the right video.
I'm going to tell y'all right now, all of these wonderful people would not be here without Patreon supporters like you. If you enjoy credible news, reviews, and commentary on UFOs and UAPs 5 days a week, you want to support this show. What's your name? Marty. Marty, look how easy this is, Marty. Pick up your phone. Boom, you're a Patreon member. I mean, look, it's so easy. You just click the link, which is right here. Just for $1 a month, you can support this show. Just fill out the information and pledge what's comfortable for you. It could be $1, $5, $10, or who knows. Just support. Hello, good morning, good evening, good day, good afternoon, and aloha, wherever you are at around the world. Welcome back to another live episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review, your home for credible news, reviews, and commentary on everything UAP and UFO, both here in the United States and today, north of the border in Canada. We're going to have a really fun show today with Daniel Otis. But before we get to that, of course, we got to pay some bills. I want to say thank you to DOS Tapes. They provide all the tunes you hear on the show. Bandcamp link, you know where it's at. Description below. Thank you so much to the Patreon supporters out there, the members of the YouTube channel. Truly appreciate it. All the super chats you guys send, I truly appreciate it. You guys know here, none of it is mandatory. If you can't support it financially, don't sweat it. Just give us a like, a share, subscribe, ring the bell. That way you're notified anytime we go live. Nothing is hidden here behind a paywall. You can access all of our content anytime you want, no matter what. So enjoy. Want to say, of course, that we've got moderators in the chat, so please keep it clean, keep it nice, keep it respectful. If not, get out of here. So thank you to Aaron, Tina Tomaszewski. I'm not sure if Michelle's in the comments there today. Want to also remind you, we've got links. Not only for our guest, Daniel Otis, and our co-hosts, Jane and Rather. We've got links for our Discord, our merch, there's a link tree. It'll take you to everything that we have here on the show. So check out the links in the description. I want to say thank you to KGRADB that put our show on the radio on Fridays, every Friday from 1 to 3. And yeah, so without further ado, now that the bills are paid, let's bring in our co-hosts. Jane Kyle.
Hey.
Rather be squidding.
Hey, Lou.
What's going on, guys?
Hey, Jane.
It's so nice.
Not much.
Yeah, it's nice to have you back, Jane. You were on a school play sabbatical.
Pretty much, because
yeah,
between like the extra homework at night and work and just trying to be a good
human
mom, a good theater mom.
Yeah, you know, yeah. A mom that feeds her children. Man,
but
I've heard a lot of bad parenting when I play video games. Like they're like, Dad, I'm hungry. Yeah. I'll be there with you in a minute. And like a minute is a 45-minute game. You know, like sometimes, right. Especially if you're like winning, you know, it's woo. So bless your heart. I'm glad you're a good mom.
Yeah, it's hard to keep those kids off the devices.
I can't imagine.
Hard to kekeep yourself off the device sometimes.
Yeah, I would have been. I don't think I would be here today if I had Snapchat as a 10-year-old. No way.
Rather, what bank did you rob this weekend?
No. I'm the up and up here, Lou.
Oh my God, that was hilarious. I think that's my favorite opening question to start the show for you, Rather. Because I mean, now I believe you robbed the bank. I'm pretty sure it happened, and I don't need any
let's
evidence.
Moving on.
Yeah, moving on. All right, well, let's bring in.
Lou in practice remote viewing, so I don't know what happened.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Today, we have a chat with Daniel Otis, who is a camera-wielding journalist who covers travel, trials, and almost everything in between. You can find his news and feature stories in outlets like the Toronto Star, Vice, CTV News, The Globe and Mail, Sunset, and Al Jazeera. Today, we break down his most recent article in Vice World News about the Canadian government releasing nearly 300 pages of documents through the Freedom of Information request that includes strange sightings from pilots, soldiers, and police officers. Without further ado, Mr. Daniel Otis, welcome back to the show, sir. So happy every time we get to have you here because it means you've written an article and something cool has happened. And before we get started, I want to just say thank you. Like, seriously, thank you from the bottom of my heart for covering this, man, and really doing the Lord's work as far as I'm concerned. I know this doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things with all the stuff that's going on in the world, but it's such a cool it's very cool to sit back and watch you do what you're doing, and getting the information, especially this time around, where it came from, how it was released, who had a hand in releasing it. Like, we were talking about all of these things the last time you were on the show, and I feel like it was like, this is never going to happen from this part of the private sector, and it kind of did, and it's just super exciting, and I'm eager to see or talk to you about how this might affect things going forward if it does. So first of all, just thanks, man. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your relentless work on this.
Hey, thanks for having me. You've been such a great supporter, and this is like the fourth or fifth time on the show here. Aren't I supposed to get like some sort of special dinner jacket?
Man, that's a great. I think you and Greenwald and Jazz Shaw would be in the Hall of Fame of the show, and maybe Lou would get in there because he's been here four or five times too. What's that, Jane?
Do like a 5-timers club like they do in us.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about.
A 5-timers club.
At least a dolphin sticker.
Something, right? Yeah. You know what? Okay, let me see what I can work on. Maybe I can put an overlay here. We could just have like a special demarcation for the guests that we truly love and have on all the time. But I guess I'll start things off. How surprised were you when they released these nearly 300 pages? And were you, because I think 20 years worth of information, I'm like, is 300, it's almost 300, is that a lot, or is that not enough? Should we have more?
There should be more. There should definitely be more. So just to give some background, my most recent story was on essentially 20 years worth of UFO reports that we got from the Federal Transportation Department here in Canada, which is called Transport Canada. Most of these reports are from professional pilots, but there's also a lot of civilian sightings in there, police officers, military, etc. When the request came in, I guess I wasn't surprised. When I first filed my Freedom of Information request for this material, they got back to me and said, look elsewhere. We don't have the records. And I didn't buy that I had an understanding of the reporting mechanisms within the transportation department here in Canada. So I expected it to be there. I was quite surprised when the release came through. I know of more reports that would have been reported to the Canadian government that didn't make it into this release. So this is not every UFO report that's ever gone into the Canadian government, but it's certainly there's certainly a volume of reports there, and some of them are rather compelling. Some of them are very brief. Some of them are very detailed. So it was sort of, I was surprised just because initially when I'd filed these requests, there was some resistance, and but by never take no for an answer, right? So I filed new requests. I tried to be more specific. I tried to target specific departments within the Canadian government instead of just the blanket, give me the UFO reports.
Right.
Well, I want the Aviation Operations Department and Transport Canada, except by going specific like that, I was able to get this material, which is it's a nice volume of data to put out there in the world. And if anyone who's listening, I encourage you, if you look up my most recent story for Vice, The full PDF with all 290 pages is right at the bottom to download.
Oh, well, I have them here pulled up from your article, so we could pull that up almost any time you want. I don't know how quick it'll be to find a certain thing you're looking for because there's no like page numbers to it, right? It's just basically one huge PDF with all these reports on it. But it's still really cool. I've been reading through them, and there's some fun reports, and yeah, we'll go through them. But I'll open up the floor for questions from you guys.
Well, yeah, I'm curious. The ones that did not get in there, do you have any idea why they weren't in there? Do you think it's just the where they reported it to, or do you think that those were the special ones that weren't in there?
Well, no, it depends. Like, there's certain ones that were classified differently. So, for example, there was a report I found from Toronto that involved multiple aircraft seeing something, take a very quick right angle turn and then dart south over Lake Ontario towards upstate New York. That one wasn't in there because it was categorized differently by whoever entered it into the system. Does that make sense? So the reports I was targeting, there's this mechanism called service or service reports, CIRVIS, which stands for Communication Instructions for Reporting Vital Intelligence Sightings. This is a mechanism that was created during the Cold War, developed, initially created by the US, but soon adapted by Canada in the 1950s. And it was to detect threats like Cold War threats, enemy submarines, unknown aircraft, and explicitly unidentified flying objects. In one of our previous talks, I had explained how this reporting mechanism lives on and is used by Canadian aviation officials, specifically the air traffic control company that operates, all air traffic control here in Canada. They've adapted this and they keep this threat reporting mechanism. And it specifically in the manual for pilots, it says, unidentified flying objects, this is what you have to do. You have to call it in. So I was targeting all of those types of reports. And in my research, I have identified since and before reports that fell outside of that specific threat mechanism. So there was one instance where I think it was posted as like a flight route hazard or something like that. They just got different categories because of the nature of the sighting. But yeah, I think this is a lot of them. This is probably most of them, but yeah, there's more for sure.
Is there like a date that this starts specifically? So I know you say Cold War. Like, I was literally just looking it up technically when the Cold War began. Google says 1945. Like, is there, like, when's the first sighting that you have a file for? Do you happen to know how long this goes back?
Yeah, I previously did a story on tracing the history of Canadian military sightings. And that one, by going back into the historical records, I was able to find pretty interesting UFO reports from Canadian military personnel at Canadian military bases going back to the early 1950s. There was one base in particular where I found a report from 1952 and from 2007, both with multiple witnesses. And the one from 1952 was genuinely the more bizarre of the two reports. This most recent story focuses specifically on aviation reports for the most part, although there are military sightings that get fed into the system. So, for example, in July of 2021, there was a Canadian military transport plane on its way to pick up at-risk personnel from Afghanistan before the Taliban takeover. And on its way, it reported seeing a glowing green object over sort of in the North Atlantic. And there was a Dutch KLM passenger flight from Boston to Amsterdam flying parallel that saw the same thing. The Canadian flight thought it was, something bizarre. The Dutch flight thought it was, quote, space debris. But because, this was two aircraft, they called in to the nearest tower in Newfoundland, in Gander, Newfoundland. And, they checked radar to see if anything else was on. So, military cases are found within these 290 pages. But again, like, there's other types of reporting mechanisms that exist in Canada that this wouldn't capture. For example, a lot of reports go into the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. If you've ever seen pictures of the guys in, red jackets on horses, those are the Mounties. It's a federal police force. My research has found UFO reports with them, for example, as well as different military apparatus. So in the Canadian historical archive, to answer your question, yeah, I've found reports going back to the early 1950s. I'm sure there's reports earlier, and they go right up until 2021.
Have you found? I know some of these are, or most of these you said are pilot sightings. I'm curious to know, have there been any pilots? How recent have some of these reports been? And have you been able to sort of track down who the pilot was, talk to any of the pilots or witnesses from any of these reports that have come up, or are you in the process of doing that?
It's more of a process thing, frankly.
Yeah.
That's the challenge when these reports get released. One of the grounds that they can redact information on is personal information. So,
right.
When the reports do contain phone numbers, email addresses, names of these aviators, usually that stuff gets redacted. I've had some luck in making contacts with some of these aviators, but pretty much 99% of these people I speak to don't want to go on the record because they don't want to deal with that kind of level of scrutiny and professional ridicule. You know what I mean? While you and I are talking openly about UFOs, UAPs, that stigma isn't as necessarily as broken in the aviation community. But that being said, there's definitely some sources I'm working on. There's actually one individual who recently agreed to do an on-the-record interview about something, and you'll expect that from me very soon. This is a uniformed Canadian. So that stuff, that's the harder part of this, right? Most of these people, they're filing reports out of duty and necessity. They're not doing it for publicity, and they don't invite that kind of publicity. If you come out as being a significant witness to UAP, because of just the sheer curiosity of people who are interested in this, you probably are going to endure a degree of unwanted attention and harassment and emails and calls. You know what I mean? And in addition to the professional scrutiny, like my experiences now that I've been reporting on the subject for almost a year, I've been working as a journalist for a decade. I had people approaching me, telling me their stories because they want to be able to share it, but not publicly. They just they want it. People, I find there's an interest in sharing tales, but not so many people want to go fully public. But some of that's going to be coming down the line, and perhaps we can talk more about that another day.
Well, I'm hoping whoever you are speaking with, that their story helps kill some of that stigma. Because I think that's the value in the pilots and the mounted police or police officers or anyone with that sort of stature in society. Like they're valuable when it comes to their eyewitness testimony, and I think it helps you folks like you get more stories, more people to come on the record and help kill the stigma. I hope you're right. I hope it's like an avalanche, or it just continues to grow as more people start to talk about this. But did you guys have any follow-up questions? Rather, I thought you looked like you had a question.
Yeah, I mean, have you been able to link any of these now public cases with things that have previously been public, like MUFON cases or anything like that?
I honestly, I haven't gone into corroborating the aviation ones against like civilian databases. Part of the reason, I put with this story, I didn't, when I got the release, I didn't want to like parse it out one story at a time on each report. Part of the reason of getting the one big release and then putting it out there in the world is so that, if someone's interested in trying to do that kind of work and, taking this huge database of predominantly aviation related reports and then trying to corroborate them with, civilian databases like MUFON maintains, do it. And if you find anything good, please tell me. Frankly, it's just, going to that level of data analysis, it's such a grind. It's such a grind. And I have a huge pile of documents still to write through and get through and, to write stories on and put out into the world. So rather that would be a great thing for someone who's who's not me to do.
Sounds like you need a team. Maybe Vice needs to get you a team, a research team.
At least an intern, maybe. But no, I work. I'm a freelancer, so I work solo. I do have a team of people that I rely on for like second set of eyes before things go out into the world, like some current and former aviators and military personnel that I've developed friendships with through this reporting on this subject, who I'm always bouncing reports off. Like none of these stories get published without going through at least 3 people who I trust, who know way more about aviation and the military than I do. So well, but the intern or the team, who's going to finance that though?
Right.
That'd be great. A full-time UFO journalism investigation team. If you know any curious billionaires,
I think it's called the AOI MSG. We want to look into it.
Yeah, but are you going to see any of that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I will. I think we'll see some of it.
I'm
hoping.
You're not going to see all of it.
No, definitely not going to see all of it. But who is?
Well, the new Daniel Otis team wants you to see all of it, and that's why that's why the stories have all the documents with them. It's we were dealing in a subject that for so long, it's just been so shrouded in secrecy. I think anyone who's engaging with the topic and doing research needs to be really, really transparent and not mysterious about their data and sources.
So I have a follow-up related to that. So you're talking about how personal names can be redacted and stuff. How redacted are these files? Is there like a file that's like that you wish, of all the files that's super redacted, that you wish you could see all the blackout marks?
Not in this release, frankly, because this release came from transportation officials, which means they don't really have much of a grounds to redact on anything other than personal information, or perhaps sometimes they redact based on if they think something belongs to another department, but that I'll get too nitty gritty if I go there. Not in this release, though. No, this release was actually quite interesting because outside of just some sort of names and email addresses, there's very little redacted in it. I think that's specifically because it came through Canada's government transportation department. The files I get from our military usually are much more heavily redacted. I always have like a smattering of things on my desk, just as example. So, okay, here's one. This is from a previous story I did. This is an Air Force logbook where it shows, the day-to-day happenings of an Air Force squadron. Everything's redacted except for like the UFO sighting I was looking for. So I have no idea if there was a response. I don't know what they were doing before, but you know what I mean? So like that's more typical, like in the military documents, heavy redactions, but the transportation ones, no. So yeah, I really like, I'm just thinking, is there anything that's really missing in here? But then the other challenge is most Canadian government departments, they redact in white. So sometimes if you're redacting in white as opposed to black or gray, when you've redacted in white, if there's a half page of blank space, you have no idea if that was already blank or if they'd redacted it out. You know what I mean? So it's possible that, what I think is a rather complete, package of documents could have significant redactions I'm unaware of. And I think that's a sneaky thing about choosing to redact in white. I wish they all did it in gray. It would be easier on the printer, but I could know where stuff was missing.
Yeah, that is quite annoying. Sorry, rather go for it.
Yeah, well, given that all the names and stuff were redacted, how were you able to get in contact with some of these airline pilots who you said you've reached out to? Is that just based on like the airline number, flight numbers and stuff like that? Or
no, it's there's like certain like aviation forums, like online groups and forums. Also introductions. It's really the majority of those. The majority of that's come through me being introduced by people. I meet someone who introduces me to someone who introduces me to someone who introduces me to someone, and they all have a story to share. there's no, I've tried, with cases, I've tried to get the identities, but it's withheld, and it's legitimately withheld, because if the government could just give out personal information for every single individual, that would be like really problematic. So I have no problem with that. I guess the interesting thing here is that a lot of these reports were also sent to Canadian ufologist Chris Rakowski in Winnipeg. And he received many of these reports directly, usually from transportation officials from Transport Canada, but also sometimes through the military. And when he was getting them unredacted with all the information, phone numbers, names, everything. Chris says Chris is in the process of readying his documents for a big new archive at the University of Manitoba. So I guess all of that will be there one day. But I don't, in his case, I bounce a lot of cases off of him. When I'm writing, we're often in communication. He interviewed some of these people in the cases where where there is contact information.
Wow. Do you have any, if you did have a team at your disposal, what would you do to maybe try to get some more information on some of these cases? Like, could you take out an ad in a newspaper of a sighting area and be like, have you seen something strange?
Yeah, that could be it. Maybe I should start postering my neighborhood, or go around airports. Do all the airport lounge men's rooms.
Yeah.
Have you seen something strange?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's such an uphill battle. I'm always, whenever I get a hint of a contact, I pursue it. I when people email me, I talk to them. I email them back unless they're being really creepy. You just got to talk to everybody, and hopefully more people will come forward and that stigma will break. And if anyone's listening in the aviation community and you have a good story to tell and you just want to tell it, well, we can talk off the record. I'm going to try and convince you to tell your story for a story, but if you ultimately disagree, then I'll respect that. It's a challenge. It's a challenge, because those sorts of eyewitness reports really elevate the subject. When you have people like David Fravor, for example, right. Someone in uniform, who that sort of, credible witness is very significant for advancing the topic forward in public forums. I think, citizen sightings are important, and I don't mean to put that down by any means, but if you want to advance the subject scientifically and as well in politics, like those sort of uniform testimonies are so important. And as I said, I'm pretty confident I'm going to have a story like that for you guys soon, maybe in the next month or two.
So it looks like you'll definitely be getting a badge of some kind.
Yeah,
we'll definitely have you back for that, I'm sure, as well. But okay, so the three sources that you kind of run stuff by before you publish it, have you tried to convince them as well to come out and sort of have any of them had an experience, or are these just pilots that look at what you're talking about and making sure that the jargon fits what's being told?
These three individuals, for the most part, are individuals who don't want the spotlight. They don't want to be in the public. They're not engaged on social media. They're just, people who are, who are in the military or in the aviation sphere, who have a genuine curiosity about the subject and want to help me ensure that my stories don't have, stupid mistakes about aviation, right, etc. One of them has had some sort of experience, but it's not anything he's going to talk about, and right, and I wouldn't push it.
Yeah. Well, how many people have you spoken to? Can you give me sort of a rough idea of how many pilots are like you said, these uniform folks who would elevate the conversation to the science, this part of this discussion and the political part of this discussion? I mean, how many people have you talked to roughly over these last couple of years that will tell you the story, but stop at, yeah, I'm not going on the record?
A fair bit. It's hard to put a number on that. I'm trying to rack my brain here. Probably I'd say in terms of people who had like interesting experiences that could make for a good story, probably under a dozen.
Okay.
But you know, you gotta, like, I have to respect that. Like,
yeah, no, I totally understand. I mean, look, I know an F-18 fighter pilot who's done bombing missions in Afghanistan and Iraq and has two crazy stories, and he'll never come on this show. He'll never, ever come on the show, primarily because he's working for a major airline. But I mean, it's not like these two stories. I think I've told the stories. Nobody knows who this person is, but they would never, you know, they would never convince anybody. I mean, but it would just, from a stigma standpoint, it would be great because you know, it's just another pilot that, you know, I think, like Gary Nolan said in one of these conversations, there's a safeties in numbers thing. You know, if you get 50 pilots in a room and this is the discussion you want to talk about, I have a feeling, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a majority of them would have some kind of story, and maybe you know, a smaller percentage of them would have really, really compelling stories. But this idea that they would openly talk about it if there was a whole bunch of them in a room, I think that stands to be true.
Most is who write to me, because I document cases here in Texas. They always want to, I don't know if always, I don't know the exact numbers, but they want to be anonymous or on a first name basis. And more so than that, when I do pry for more, like even draw a picture. Like, you don't even have to do an interview with me. It usually stops. It's like, I got it off my chest. I'm done. Like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Or, you know, and they'll often preface with, I'm not crazy. I don't believe in UFOs and aliens, but I saw. So I, just to echo back up, you know, here in Texas, as well as Canada, I guess, people are pretty hesitant about it.
But like, what? I don't blame them. And you know, we've all seen how toxic, for example, of a place, how toxic some of the UAP discussions on social media can be, and how like toxic certain individuals can be to each other. You know, that's a very vocal element of the crowd. And, you know, but in addition to that, just the professional scrutiny is hard. The individual I'll be writing about, he's at a point where he just wants to be open about it. You know, he's been following the developments in the US. He's aware that there haven't really been any, you know, super high profile witnesses have come forward in Canada. But he doesn't see it that way. He just wants to be transparent about what happens, and hopefully, you know, he understands that the only way we're ever going to get anywhere close to answers is if we have more and better data. And, you know, witness testimony is so important in that picture. And it's an uphill battle, but, you know, I think shows like yours, you know, work like mine, we're all contributing to the normalization of the subject. And, you know, once, you know, people can start having conversations about the things they've seen without they're necessarily following, you know, smirks and laughs, like, then we'll be getting there. And I think we're definitely making progress. Like, look what's happening in you know, in Washington, D.C., you know, this growing chorus of politicians who've seen classified information that have convinced them that there's, you know, something worth exploring here. I guess just the other week, we actually, for the very first time, we had a Canadian politician in Parliament, you know, the equivalent of a member of Congress, openly ask questions about, you know, UAP sightings involving nuclear sites. You know, that was huge in Canada. And the only reason we're seeing that kind of progress is because the subject is being normalized through, you know, work like yours, work like mine, work like, you know, so many people are doing. So we're on the right track. Obviously, we want, you know, your F-18 pilot and everyone to just be jumping up and down, willing to be filmed telling their story. But, you know, there's definitely personal ramifications for coming forward. It's not a holiday for some people, and I think some people endure some harassment, and as well as, you know, professional ramifications. So you can't pressure people, right? Like, it's right. It's their story. They'll come out if they want, but, you know, perhaps by seeing, like I've had instances where, in journalism, sometimes you talk to people and they change their minds. Like maybe this guy will change their mind down the road, and if you're like a good supportive buddy and he knows that you've kept your word, then he's going to want to tell that story to you on your platform, right? So, right. Just got to respect people and their desires.
Do you think there is such a thing as a watershed moment for this story to be talked about more?
Didn't it happen?
I mean, like I'm kind of, I mean, yes, in a way, but we're still struggling. Like, why isn't the major news covering your story right now? Like, this should be something that hits the major news stream, and that's not a knock. Like, I think this should be talked about on Good Morning America. This should be being talked about on the nightly news. This is amazing work. This is 20 years worth of information and data from pilots, not, and police officers.
Well, not just pilots. Like some of these are corroborated with radar signatures, right? Like these are,
I mean, a lot of these kind of reminded me of, because I started reading through them, they kind of reminded me of they made me think of the 1994 Michigan case, who we had Nick Coffin on last week to talk about, in that you have all of these people reporting the same thing in the same area. You've got it on radar. You've got phone call conversations between police dispatch, and the people calling in. You've got a phone call conversation between the National Weather Service and the police department, and it's such a beautiful case, and it should be held up as a sort of a jewel in the crown of cases to talk about, because there is no just paintbrush explanation of swamp glass or people were seeing things, because they were compelled to call the police, like not just one person, dozens of people. And I just, so like, why isn't this story getting traction in this mud?
That's a fantastic question. I wish I had the answer.
That's what I mean. Like, I think if we had that watershed moment, I think this would have been picked up immediately.
But I think we had it. It came and went, and that's the sad reality. Listen, I've been working as a journalist for over a decade. I've done a lot of work for mainstream news outlets. I've been staff writer. Right now I freelance for some mainstream outlets. It is a challenge to get these types of stories out there, but I think that watershed moment would have been, if anything, it would have been the ODNI report and all the chatter that surrounded it, and it was a hot news item for a week, and then the news cycle just keeps rolling on, right?
Well, do you think it has to be
and frankly, the story I wrote was it was supposed to appear over 2 weeks ago on a Thursday morning, and we pulled it last minute because just hours before, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Right. And so we held it off for a week. I imagine, had that not happened, perhaps there would have been a bit more attention, but that's not what I'm striving for. Frankly, my UFO research is completely insignificant compared to the struggles that are happening in that country. And if that's dominating the news cycle, there's good reason. Right. I no problems with me there. But why is it not a bigger story in general? Well, it is when there's news items like the ODNI report. I was surprised there wasn't more stuff on the U.S. defense authorization spending bill. I think that was passed in late December. There seemed to be very little press on that. What do we have? What can we do? We plug away. We find more and better data. We find more and better witnesses. I have a feeling. I have a feeling that things will happen that will crack things open. Washington isn't ironclad. There will be leaks. It's very clear to me that, for example, the Senate Intelligence Committee is privy to information that has not been disseminated to the public. I'm sure that kind of stuff will get out there one day. Let's hope. I think that's what it takes. You know, I can hold 290 pages of reports up in front of you. You know, but what do people want to see? They want to see crystal clear as day video. Like go take a picture of the moon standing still with your iPhone tonight. You know, like it's not going to come out that good.
Yeah.
So what do we need? We need more and better data. And I think one thing that gets lost in the conversation a little bit, you know, news cycle obviously is so focused on like what's happening right now, like super current events. But I think when you impress upon people the historical continuity of like UFO, UAP sightings, when you can say, hey, listen, like there's reports dating back 70 years to the 40s and 50s, and you know, they haven't changed too much, you know, in nearly a century. I think that impresses people on an individual level. And I think we need to be amplifying some of that historical data and holding it up, you know, side by side with the contemporary stuff. Because it's so easy in today's environment to just dismiss everything as being a drone. But like, did you know of any drones that could make high speed right angle turns in 1952? Like, I don't.
That 1952 sighting you mentioned earlier, you called it bizarre. Was it? What is that? What you were just describing?
You know what? I don't have that report sitting right in front of me to quote from, and it'll like be a few seconds of me clicking very awkwardly to find it. But if you look up my Vice contributor page, there's a story in there on Canadian military sightings dating back to the 50s, and that one's in there. And as with all my stories, every story includes a document gallery that shows all the original documents that I've based everything off of. So that report is in there.
Did you have another question before I get to some of these audience questions?
Well, yeah. I was wondering, you know, are there any hints in these 290 pages that there are any videos or images taken by the pilots that maybe will come out at some point?
Well, the funny thing was I did a story earlier, I guess sort of late last year, on a Canadian police officer who filmed something with his cruiser's dash cam. And at the time, I wrote the picture as, you know, reported dash cam footage, alleged dash cam footage. Well, this package, this 290-page package, contains a report of his I didn't have when I wrote that story, and specifically mentions dash cam footage. So that's one example. There's several civilian ones that mention corroborating footage. That footage was not included in the release. Sometimes people send things in when they file sightings. But there are cases, and as you mentioned, and I think it deserves maybe some more specific mention, was there was one. Most of these reports are usually just like a couple sentences, you know, and it's just the nature of it. There's a guy in a plane, he or she sees something, they call air traffic control, you know, they put a line of detail down. But there's one report in here, I think the longest report in the package, involves two civilians seeing something, and then that sighting being corroborated on NORAD radar. NORAD being the joint Canada-U.S. North American Air Defense Group. So this was a pretty wild case. There was a guy in his fishing boat at night and a woman on shore in Nova Scotia, one of our Atlantic provinces. So I have it here. Yeah, it's from December 2018. And so they both see a light hovering in the sky. They call a local search and rescue center. The search and rescue center notifies a Canadian Air Force squadron that's tied to NORAD. They review NORAD radar data, and then they see a radar hit that's at the exact time and space as what these civilians saw. Like, so what they picked up on radar corroborated almost exactly to what the civilians were saying. And they included in the 290 pages, the full reports there. And the radar technician, I believe it's a radar technician who wrote it, they described they can't explain why they suddenly got a ping, you know, at something like 12,000 feet, and how it sort of moved around in the general vicinity for 36 minutes and then just disappeared. You know, they said maybe it was weather, but, you know, it was observed on the ground they reported saying they saw it for approximately 45 minutes as just a light hovering in the sky. Who knows? But, you know, there are cases like that where there is corroborating evidence. The police officers' dash cam footage, NORAD radar, etc. It's not the majority of cases. Usually when pilots file something, there is evidence that I found in Air Force records of them checking radar. Sometimes they get hit, sometimes not, usually not. But yeah, some of these cases do have, corroborating evidence to go with them. Some of them have multiple pilots. There was one case from the Prairie province of Saskatchewan where multiple pilots reported seeing something that they reported it as a bright light surrounded by a halo, and it was multiple aircraft. So it's not just one guy seeing something in every instance. There are cases, that have way more testimony and data to go with them.
It's fascinating. Another question: have you seen any, or been able to look and dig into any patterns around maybe dates or places where these sightings have happened? This last one you said was around water, and that's kind of a theme. I'm curious if you.
Well, and the interesting thing about that one, so that was from December 2018, and in October 1967, just nearby in a place called Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, there was a very famous mass sighting where multiple witnesses saw a glowing object go into the ocean and disappear. This is a stone's throw from where this sighting that was corroborated by NORAD radar occurred. Cool. So there's
get our scuba gear.
Yeah, let's get our scuba gear. But in terms of, are there specific hotspots in Canada? You would need a more scientific mind than mine, applying all of these, putting in all the coordinates. And listen, if you want to do it, most of these have GPS coordinates in them, right? So anyone, be my guest, do the dirty data work that the writer can't handle. But there are certain areas, definitely water. I don't know if this is my mind creating connections, but over water, the Great Lakes, in particular, certain parts of the interior of British Columbia, tons of reports from the prairies. Our prairie provinces are Manitoba and Saskatchewan, so that's right in the middle of Canada. Lots of reports from there. But overall, if you look at the package, there's reports from the East Coast, the West Coast, in between, up north in the Arctic, right along the border with the U.S. I'm sure if someone plotted some of these, some of them are occurring very close to the border with objects traveling towards the United States. There's probably corroborating American data out there for some of these. But is there a specific hotspot? I wish I had that answer, but I think a more scientific-minded person ought to do that kind of data work.
Do you know if there any more? Have you been able to find anything more about Shag Harbor than what's known? I was always curious with the green foam, if there was ever a sample collected or any study done, or if they followed any of the witnesses after to see if there was any health effects on them.
That's a case I know about and I've read about, but I haven't done any independent research on that one. I do know there is more data out there, and those would be great questions for a ufologist like Chris Rakowski, who I mentioned before. He would probably have some more information on that. Generally speaking, my work and at least the research I'm doing is really hyper focused on contemporary stuff, contemporary military, police, aviation, and procedures, and then internal government communications about the subject. My research is so focused on that, mostly because, there's a great historical body of UFO, UAP research in Canada. And there's some great researchers who've done, some really good stuff on, these historical Cold War era cases. So I've just been, and also because I'm a journalist, working in mainstream news media most of my career, I'm trying to be super hyper focused on contemporary stuff involving people in uniform and government witnesses. But if you want, I believe that there's books on Shag Harbor. There's a documentary on it. There's a lot of good material with a lot of very compelling witnesses talking about that case, and there's a lot of documentation to back it up. But I wish I could point to something specific and said all the answers are here. But it's a fascinating case. It's definitely one of the most important cases in Canada, just because it involves so many witnesses all seeing the same thing, pretty much.
We've got
slime.
Yeah, green slime. I mean, how could you not want to get in on that?
Green slime.
Or foam, was it? It was foam. So Sparky Lady had a question. She says, do you have international UFO cases that Canada will talk about, but the US won't?
Anything in specific coming to mind? No, but I will say this. Even though our transportation departments, like, they're very dismissive when they give me like official statements, they basically say, we don't really care about this subject. It's, there's nothing we can follow up on from a regulatory perspective. There's no one we can give a fine to, like, we're not interested. But I think the main difference between Canada and the US is just that there is a body of, UFO, UAP reports to be had in Canada, because our air traffic control operators have specific procedures. Like, if you see a UFO, this is what you should do. It's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, which like regulates, flying in the US, it's my understanding that they don't have specific UFO procedures. Like, do I have this one on my desk? I think I do, actually. Yeah, here. This is if you go to, this is a manual for pilots. And it's basically, what's its service, CIRVIS, Service Vital Intelligence Sightings. And on the, it specifically includes like unidentified flying objects. Quote, examples of events requiring service reports are unidentified flying objects, submarines, or surface warships identified as being non-Canadian or non-American, violent explosions, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, the big difference is that I don't think there is a specific reporting mechanism for aviators in the US. And I would imagine that's why there isn't a robust, aviation, a robust, specific, explicitly saying UFO aviation reports. I do know there have been some folks who've done some great research in the drone reports that the FAA maintains. And I do know that there's some pretty unusual and anomalous things that are being called drones by the FAA, but they don't, unlike in Canada, we specifically have procedures for UFOs.
So that's what the US needs, is some sort of reporting system that differentiates the drones from the UFOs.
But even if you had them in the US, like, because the Pentagon has shown such a robust interest in the subject, like, it's feasible that if the FAA created a reporting mechanism and fed reports into that those reports could be withheld from freedom of information on national security grounds, just because of the US military interests, which we don't have in Canada. And I think that also goes to explain why I was able to obtain, like 290 pages of material. It's because in Canada, it's not perceived as a defense or security issue by our military. And, there's people in Canada being like, look at the US, the Pentagon's taking it so seriously. Our military should too. I don't know if that's a good idea. I just, as an individual, don't trust militaries to make the best decisions for humanity. Apologies if that offends anyone, but I don't think they're looking out for the best interests of the public always. They're looking out for their budgets and bolstering their forces. And if Canada started perceiving this as a defense issue, then like all this material would be withheld from me on national security grounds, which is a completely valid reason to withhold data from freedom of information requests here. So I think I really deviated from a question there. I don't know where we started, but
no, it was. Do we have any international UFO cases that Canada? And you can think off any offhand, and so that's But I loved it because I can't imagine what your desk looks like. But the fact that you can just pull these files so quickly, I think it's all like, yeah, there it is. Boom.
Well, like my desk is a total disaster, but I do prepare a little bit for these things. I just like throw papers on the desk. It's
organized disaster.
Maybe I'll need to talk about this report, or maybe it's going to be this one. Maybe I'm going to want to reference this one.
Well, man, I'm happy that your desk is a mess because it provides awesome content. But somebody's asking and also saying that our super chat's not working. I'm sorry that the super chat's not working. I've had this issue on other channels too. Sometimes if you put like double spaces or too many, I don't know, just like it has to be editorially correct before it lets you send it. It's got, I don't think it has to be grammatically correct, but it has to be anyway, whatever. The Queen had a question. What can Canadians do to seek disclosure at a time when the government is even less eager than the US to address the topic?
That's a good question. I spoke to a member of Parliament's office about this. This individual is interested in the topic. No surprise, this is the guy who went public with the statements. I've been in communication with their office. They told me nobody asks questions. Nobody writes, I think for people who are really engaged with the subject, everything seems very obvious and they know what the good sources are, etc. I think for the majority of people in both of our countries, they're just like not tuned in. This is not something they're following. It's not something they're aware of. Even some of the huge developments that have like come out of, the Pentagon or the ODNI report, like a lot of people don't know if that stuff happened, right? So what can we do? If you're a Canadian, write your member of Parliament, write Transport Canada, ask questions, point to evidence, ask actionable questions. One great thing I think people could say, for example, as I mentioned, all these reports came from Transport Canada, our transportation department. Transport Canada, they have an agreement with the air traffic control company in Canada, which is called NAV Canada. If they just tweaked their agreement and added a sentence to it that would change the types of data that would come forward, there could be huge benefits. So for example, right now, the air traffic controllers are just obliged to give about a sentence or two of detail, right? But just by changing the agreements between the air traffic control company and the government transportation regulators, by saying, in addition to the 2 lines of detail, we need to have radar data and we want the tower cockpit audio, So if we reach out to our Canadian officials and just say, just saying, hey, you should be more interested in UFOs, there's nothing for them to do there. But right. If you say, give them things that are actionable, like, hey, I think Transport Canada, should compel air traffic controllers to provide more data on these cases when they do occur, I think that would be more useful. Point, and if you are reaching out, point to some of the more, mainstream coverage. I think that's what gets people's attention. I think the New York Times coverage is a great way of sort of opening people's eyes who perhaps are, not well-versed in the subject, help educate, it's just, I find a lot of people are, have asked me, Canada should be more interested. And I'm wary of that, because if Canada gets interested and buys into the whole American threat narrative, it means all this data I've been able to pull suddenly becomes inaccessible. But I think we can educate our elected officials and encourage them to treat this as a scientific issue and to be more transparent with data. People in uniform who ought to know what's going on in the sky are reporting things that are genuinely unusual in Canada. And instead of just, we have a reporting mechanism and then these reports collect dust, right? There's no further follow-up or research usually on any of this stuff. If we just changed the way we dealt with it and perhaps, compelled the air traffic control company, NAV Canada, to be, to readily supply more data in these cases for scientific analysis, that would go a long way. So how to get Canadians encouraged, help show people that there's mainstream coverage of this and help shape the conversation as being a scientific mystery that we can only solve with more and better data. I am not going to be one to ever trumpet any sort of militarization of the subject, because the more it becomes militarized, the less data everyday citizens like us get.
Well, kind of along those same lines, it's amazing that you got the last 20 years, but what about going forward? Are you going to be filing Freedom of Information Acts, on a regular cadence to try to get these contemporaneous events out?
Oh, I guess I'm going to have to, eh?
Please do.
Yeah. No, that's it. I have, I've over the past year, I did some counting because I thought it would be fun. Since in the past year, I've done 130 requests. I plan to keep at it. I think there's certain broad stroke requests I'll probably ask for with a frequency of every 6 months to a year. I intend to keep collecting data. I have a few more good stories up my sleeve. There's a few more documents sitting on my shelves that I think everyone's going to be happy to see. So I'm still going to be pursuing this going forward. If anyone wants to finance a full-time UFO research desk, please give me a call. But otherwise, I'm a freelancer. I have a bread and butter news writing job, and I expend my additional time, researching this and trying to, publish my data and get the stuff out there.
Well, I do have a way that we might be able to help you help yourself. And it's the Big Phone Home 3. I mean, for that, we had a website where we had templates for people to copy and paste into an email, basically requesting exactly what you were saying. Just reminding them, hey, are you familiar with David Fravor? Are you familiar with the ODNI report? Are you familiar with this? We're requesting more transparency, more clarity on this topic. In this next Big Phone Home, we're going to be requesting that the Air Force be more transparent. We're going to be requesting that they not only push for more declassification and less overclassification, not on just UFOs, but on all subjects. Like the fact that we overclassify too many things, and it leads to intelligence failures like 9/11. I think when we could take the topic and compare it to things like that and say, this is why it's important that we should dig and look into this. And, oh, by the way, did you know about this? Did you hear about this? This fighter pilot or these laws that have been passed in the United States. So, I mean, I would love if you can help us draft one of these templates for the Big Phone Home 3, because we're going to have one for Australia. We're going to have a couple for the United States. I'd love to have one for Canada and the UK. So that way, it's a worldwide effort, because if you don't live in the United States, you're not going to call U.S. representative, but you want to activate yourself in your country. I want to try and have as many options for people, and you're a leader on this topic. You guys sort of in the dark cave, kind of like Greenwald, with a torch in his hand and saying, okay, where can I find the good data, and how can I use this data to get more data, and declassify things, not overclassify things. So is that something maybe we could get your help with?
Yeah, let's do it. I was happily on your Phone Home 2.
Yeah,
and let's do it again, and let's create a good template for the Canadians, because like I said, I spoke to this member of Parliament's office, and they said, we don't hear from it. And I asked them, if someone were writing politicians, what should they say? And they said, be informative and make sure there's something actionable in it, right? Like, what should they be doing, right? They're public servants, and just getting them to get up to speed isn't enough. How can they serve us, And
but I think it's also important to show people what that looks like, because we can sit here and say it till we're blue in the face, but sometimes that's not enough. It's like, okay, I got to write the template for you. I got to show you who to send it to, how to contact that person. And that's fine. I'm all for that, because I think if we make it fun, if we make it something that we can convince people, hey, this is worthy of your time. This is worthy of taking 5 minutes and sending this to your local rep, your state rep, your what's the region rep? I don't know what you guys do over there. I'm sorry.
Our members of parliament.
Well, I know it's a parliament, but I don't know because there's no states. There's no There's regions, right? I don't know. Anyway.
Where is Canada?
Where is Canada? Who invented it? No, but yeah, you get what I'm saying, man. So I'm so happy that you're gonna help us with that, because I think it will help. It's kind of a follow-up question of mine was, do you think this information that has come out, this 20 years worth of data, do you think that'll help the flow of information, or or is it going to close the faucet of information?
I don't know. It's hard to say how things go. The faucet was pretty close to begin with, and it was only by, making specific requests to specific departments within, the transportation department that I was able to get it. I think it's a double-edged sword. Now after almost a year's steady research into how these sorts of things are tracked in Canada, I have a pretty complete picture of what the chain of custody of reports are. I know what specific units and offices to ask, but they know that I know that too. You know what I mean? So it's always possible that while I'm able to better target things now, that they'll, perhaps government departments can always reduce the retention periods for documents, right? Retention policies can change, things can get shuffled. I don't know. I have a feeling we're going to continue to see more and better data. And I think, what I would encourage for, the Phone Home 3 is that's the actionable thing. It is clear as day that our governments hold data on this subject, right? And they hold data that's not being released to the public. And, I think the hallmark of any democratic society should be transparency. And it just so happens that there's certain subjects in our democracies that have no transparency whatsoever. I think this is, to me, I think this is a scientific problem that we can only solve, with better data. And we need to encourage members of, government to seek out that data and actively, be transparent with it. For example, there's some very outspoken members of the Senate Intelligence Committee on this subject. There's been suggestions that they've seen other videos and stuff like that. Why does that remain veiled in secrecy? Like, demand it. Those videos were captured with equipment that you American taxpayers paid for, right? You paid for that fighter jet. You paid for that, camera that was mounted on its nose. You paid for that. Unless you're dodging taxes, I don't know. In that case, then you didn't pay for that. But if you did pay for that, I think I maybe I'm a little bit radical like that in my perception of how our society should work. But I think that it's ours. It's our material. So let us see it. And I think we're within our rights to ask our elected officials and our representatives who should be representing us to represent us on this question.
Here. If I had a glass of champagne, I would raise it in the air. JJ says, I've had a conversation with Canadian Member of Parliament Matt Green about the UFO disclosure. He's a high-ranking government official that's on our side. Have you had any discussions with Matt Green by chance?
No, I have not. But I'm writing that down.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, you might have made that happen there, JJ.
I'll follow up on that one. And also feel free to my contact information. If you look me up on Twitter or my website, there's DMs are always open. My email address is there. Shoot me a line. I'm curious about that one.
He's again, his link is in the description below, and he's also got his Twitter handle right there in his name at @DSodus. Go check it out. If there was a compelling video or photo in the public domain, the enthusiasm would be very different. That's just a comment from Event. Thank you so much for the $5 chat. And I agree. I think I and we've had this conversation before. I think it's a good idea. We already have 3 videos. The United States already released them. They're public information. Let's get the longer versions. I want the longer versions of these videos. Why not? And if there was other planes, why don't we get the other angles of these objects from those other pilots? Because usually a plane's not flying by itself. It's usually in a squadron with other planes. So there should be other and that's just if they're far away from the fleet. If they're close to the fleet, then we've got submarines, there's radar, there's all sorts of equipment that could just bring more clarity to this. So I think that's another thing that we'll be asking that's actionable. Like, hey, look, this exists. Give us a longer version. What's the deal? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'd just like to add, I think from a emotional response, photos and videos are really what's needed to really invoke that. But man, the radar signatures, I think, really trumps photos and videos, because that's hard data that there's actually something physical there up in the skies, which we get with some of these reports, which I'm shocked that there's not more coverage and not more people talking about this stuff.
Isn't it the story of the subject?
Preaching to the choir.
All the data, all the silence, right? Like this is what we're up against. And I think what drives me forward is the fact that I'm not the kind of person who tries to ascribe any sort of explanation for what people are seeing. I'm sure 1,000 people see 1,000 different things, but for me, at least, what's compelling to me is that there's a mystery, and that people who ought to have answers don't. And I think, if we're reaching out to go back to what we were talking about before, talking to elected officials, et cetera, let's impress upon the mystery. I think with that sort of audience, if you veer too quickly into your theories about what's going on, you're going to lose your audience. You know what I mean? I think it's just enough to impress upon people that, mysteries are alive and well on this planet, and that, we have something here that, it's worth digging into.
A genuine mystery that I think could be measured and put in a lab eventually, but we need to open the conversation first before that happens. We got a last question here for you. My UFO sighting happened over Lake Ontario. After years of believing it was 100% aliens, I found out that Lockheed has facilities in upstate New York. I'm curious if you have come across any info regarding Lockheed in your research. Thank you for the donation, G. West.
Well, Lockheed is supposed, legend says, Lockheed is developing interesting things, right? It's a leading military and aerospace company. I wouldn't be surprised if they're developing things that, would be unfamiliar to us. Years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I was camping in Death Valley, California, and I saw a light bouncing around in the sky in the way I've never seen anything before. And I didn't think anything of it, because it's just surrounded by military test ranges, right? Lake Ontario is interesting. There's actually a significant number of reports in and around Lake Ontario, going back years. I'm sure experimental craft being tested by Lockheed could explain some of that. I'm not sure it could explain all of it. Just the very nature of the reports I've been finding, a lot of aviation reports from the lake over the Great Lakes, things traveling south, things hovering over the lake, things traveling north. Could Lockheed explain some of it? I'm sure. Yeah, I'm definitely sure. But, when you look in the historical record and you see those types of reports going back, into the 50s, 60s, 70s, it's probably not all Lockheed, in my opinion, but it's definitely a thread to pull there. And I think, where these companies are in terms of technology, they're probably always, at least 20 years ahead of what we see, in the consumer facing world. So it's definitely within the realm of possibility. And if Lockheed has developed some sort of new form of propulsion, that can change humanity, don't hide that thing. Give it to us. I don't know. And if you find any more information about Lockheed in your research, specifically about upstate New York, shoot me an email. Very curious to hear more.
Well, again, if this is human tech, it's still a very interesting story. If this is human hand stuff, then we still have the right to demand a lot of things, including how the tech works.
Well, I mean, if it is all human stuff, some of these things that people are witnessing behave in such weird, traveling extremely fast, making sharp turns without slowing down. If we've, for example, if humanity's harbored a new if we've harnessed a new source of energy that could end our dependency on the fossil fuels that are, choking our planet, and that's being withheld, that's huge. The implications are huge. Even if it's all just earthly stuff, the implications are huge just by the nature of some of the flight characteristics we've been seeing.
Joe A asked, does Canadian Parliament have an equivalent to the U.S. Congress Gang of Eight? I think that's a good question. I'll also kind of follow that up. If not, if they don't, are there certain committees or subcommittees in Canada that the Canadian people can target when discussing this topic, like the equivalent of the, what the United States has as far as the foreign, I'm trying to think of a committee right now and I'm going blank, but any one of these security committees that Gillibrand sits on, is there any equivalent to that where hey, these are the group of senators you should be targeting Canada?
Yes. Well, there's the. You
don't have to give me that list now, but I'm just saying. That could be something that we can implement. When we do decide to send out these Canadian letters.
The vast majority of data is held by Transport Canada, the transportation department where these 290 pages came from. And there's also a lot of data with the Canadian Air Force and Canadian NORAD operations. Now, within our parliament, we have committees that are similar to like your congressional and Senate committees. And there are committees that specifically deal with transportation, public safety, national security, defense. I have a list of about 5 or 6 committees that I think could be engaged in this topic. They're not. I've reached out to all of the ones that I thought could have any tangential, engagement in this, and all of them had gotten back to me and said, no, this isn't something we looked into. But I think perhaps, when we're getting ready for the big phone home 3, I will prepare a list of committees, and each committee will have multiple members of parliament and or senators. And those would be people that I would highly recommend reaching out to, because, the way Canadian government and American government works is very different. In the Republican and Democratic parties, there's a lot of dissent within the parties. Like, you'll have Democrats voting against other Democrats on legislation. Right. You know what I mean? It's not perfect cohesion between the two parties.
Right.
In Canada, there's
still independent thought.
Yeah, there's room for independent thought in Congress. I mean, the executive, like the president, has a lot of power, but the president can't get anything really done unless they're cooperating with Congress and Senate. And individuals fall on all types of spectrums in the political, order. But all of this is to say is in Canada, that doesn't really happen. In Canada, if there's laws being passed, the party unity and the party cohesion and the party discipline is very strict. You very rarely will have someone on the floor of Parliament asking questions that could, without getting authorization from their party leaders first. Whereas in the US, I think in Congress, you have way more independent thought, even if some of that thought gets a little wacky. But all of this is to say, on the actual committees, that's where the work gets done. And by writing your local representative in Canada and saying, hey, can you do something about UFOs? If they're not on the right committee or if they're not in government, there's actually nothing they can do, right? There's nothing actionable they can do to really help things outside of perhaps proposing some legislation. But again, the chances of that happening without the leadership's authorization are very slim in Canada. So I highly encourage, if anyone does want to try and get Canadian politicians engaged in the subject, you should target relevant committees and go after the committee members, because they're, right. If you raise a question in a committee, you have to get an answer from government. So just to go back to the example I said, we recently had a member of parliament speaking out about this for the first time in decades.
Right.
And he did so in the Natural Resources Committee. Canada, if you don't know, is a huge supplier of global uranium, which is used for nuclear power plants, et cetera. And so because, mining for uranium and certain nuclear facilities falls under the umbrella of the Natural Resources Department. The Natural Resources Committee in Parliament is where this member of Parliament sits. So he, within his lane said, hey, I want you to report back to me on UAP reports at Canadian nuclear facilities. So that's all of this example is just to illustrate getting really nitty gritty in the politics, just to say it's the committees where the work happens. So if you want to get someone to get something done and get a real proper answer from the government, it's probably going to have to go through the committees. That's the only realistic place where we can see some change happen.
Well, and that's exactly what we targeted when we did the Phone Home 1 and 2 is we went to, I believe it was 8 different committees, like the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, Committee on Space Science and Tech, all of these things where this conversation is most likely to happen. Because if you're sending it to senators and congressmen that have no clue about this, they're less likely to respond to it. Whereas if you've got somebody who's sitting on especially an intelligence committee, or like in your case where it's, hey, I stay in your lane and this is the lane you're going to ask for it in, that's awesome. And I think encouraging these senators and politicians, and I even when you sent out your story all over the world, I reached out to NAV Canada and Transport Canada and the Canadian government and just say thank you for supplying this. Like I think there's no hurt in that either. Like when they do something good, we should acknowledge that and encourage more of it.
Yeah, I mean, I find that the Air Force in Canada is actually quite good with acknowledging that there's some reality to the subject. Our transportation department is very, very dismissive. But yeah, acknowledge good work and good releases when it comes. My hat goes off to our transportation officials. Like I said, the first time I asked for this body of material, they said, go look elsewhere. And I just kept asking and tried to be more and more specific. And then we got results, and, good for them on finally finding this stuff.
Well, guys, do you have any last questions here for Daniel before we let him get out of here? Usually he only sticks around an hour, but we got him for an hour and a half already so far today. But I don't want to overstay my welcome.
You're just watching me get sweatier and sweatier.
Yeah. But Jade, do you got anything?
I mean, I think the answer is no, but I just have to ask, are there happen to be any abduction contact entity reports anywhere in the modern day research you've done in Canada?
I steer clear of those types of stories for a very specific reason, and it has nothing to do with the validity of that realm. It's just like I'm a journalist who's writing for mainstream, the biggest outlets we have in Canada, and I've been writing internationally, etc. I am conscious of the fact that my ability to continue telling stories on this subject is contingent on me being hyper focused on official documentation and uniformed witnesses. I feel if I deviate from that path now and delve into reports from experiencers and things like that it might irreparably harm my ability to tell the document-based stories for a mainstream news audience. Does that make sense? It's like I'm still struggling to convince media outlets here that this is a valid subject, and I'm presenting them with Air Force documents outlining cases and things being detected on radar and etc. I'm presenting the most straight and sober material I can find, and still facing resistance about its validity. And were I to take that next step into the other that realm of experiencers and stuff like that, I think it would negatively impact my ability to continue doing the type of work I've been doing. I think there's great people who deal with that, and I think there's some very, very compelling cases. For example, what happened in rural Zimbabwe, 30 odd years ago. There's compelling, interesting data out there, but I'm really cognizant of the fact that I'm perhaps, if we're all contributing to creating openness and perhaps contributing to a greater disclosure movement, I know what I'm capable of doing and what I can do well is this, document-based stuff and trying to get it in more mainstream outlets. And I really feel as though that work would suffer when it's so hard to get even this very, document-based stuff accepted. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Total sense. And I have a similar approach where I kind of avoid or I don't get those reports. And it's not like all the documents though, like the documents that you have, it's not showing up either. Which is pretty typical, the nuts and bolts Tic Tac UFO style reports.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, like most of these, and I know civilian reports in the almost 300 pages, right? It was primarily.
But there's civilian ones in there too.
Okay.
There's people calling their local airports, asking, calling air traffic controllers. There's individuals notifying the military. I mean, there's one where a guy called an Air Force base because he saw thousands of diamond-shaped objects zipping over his head. Wow. So the reports run the whole gamut. If you go through those 290 pages, you will also find things that are clearly drones and identified as drones. There's things that are clearly balloons. There's things that are drone or balloon. The threat reporting mechanism that they use to capture this isn't only UFOs, like other things fall under that umbrella too. So if you go through, they're not all 100% UFO reports, but there's certainly, dozens in there from, mostly from pilots, again, police officers as well, military personnel. It runs the gamut, but there's more out there. The Canadian Air Force has similar types of archives, which I've targeted with requests that should be coming in, hopefully soon. And there's more cases with our transportation officials. They just happen to be categorized differently by the people who wrote the reports. But this is the bulk of it, that's for sure.
Rather, any last thoughts here, bro?
Yeah, I do have a final question for you. I think that all of us here in the room believe that UFOs are real and that there's a real mystery here. Probably most of our listeners do as well. But I still feel like it's a little bit of an open question of whether these UFOs are really displaying physics-defying capabilities. And I'm just kind of curious to your own thoughts on that, and if there's anything in these 290 pages that might kind of sway your thinking on whether they are having these advanced capabilities.
Well, there's certainly cases in there where things are behaving in ways that I can't explain based on my knowledge of, current aerospace technology. When you see reports of a light, like a ball of light just inexplicably following an airplane for a few minutes, when you see reports of things making, turning without slowing down, most aircraft I know of, they arc into their turns, right? They bounce like right angles. So there's enough reports for me that sustain me in the sense that, to me, it's pretty clear that there's a mystery that, I think the evidence, I say pretty clearly in my story, the evidence suggests that UFOs exist, right? Like in the strictest sense of the term, they're objects, they're flying, and they're unidentified. I think the real question is, what are they? And I think where we lose a lot of people, especially in our advocacy work, like what you guys are trying to do, talking to elected officials, you lose people, you lose the uninitiated if you start directly with the ET hypothesis. And I know a lot of people go that way, and a lot of people have come to that conclusion in different ways. And I mean, that's one explanation perhaps out of many, right? But we have to be so careful. The subject for us, all this data seems so obvious, and any hardcore UFO nut who's going through these reports will be like, nothing in there is earth shattering, right?
Right.
We have to, and I think we just have to present it as a mystery and not be hyper focused on what the explanations are. I think that's how we get attention and more interest in the subject. Let's be content that there's a mystery on our planet, and let's be wary of anyone who has very clear answers, because this is something that humanity's been grappling with for decades. And for anybody who says they have a very clear picture of what's going on, why do you have that special knowledge, and where does it come from? Show us your sources.
Yeah. No, and I think I think you nailed it perfectly. And again, it's why the standard for us is, what can we put on the desk of a senator to convince them that there's a mystery here? It's got to be quick. It's got to be concise. It can't go on forever. It's got to get right to the point immediately. And I think David Fravor a great place to start. Alex Dietrich's a great place to start. The New York Times is a great place to start. The DNI, Avril Haines is, all these things that have been said and laws that have been written. These are all great places to start the conversation. To say, hey, are you aware of ABC? But yeah, Daniel, I'm going to leave you with this unidentified aerial poutine. Is what the acronym is, now and forever.
Yummy. Good. Yeah. I'm ready for dinner. I love an unidentified aerial poutine.
Sounds like a food fight.
Exactly.
It sort of sounds like the aftermath of a bad poutine.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Otis, please, the floor is yours. Tell everyone where they can find your work, and again, where they can reach out.
Find me on Twitter at DSOtis. Good reason to follow me there is, let's say I write a story and I get some documents on it after publication. I usually just post all that stuff on Twitter so people can see it. No sense writing a whole other story on 2 or 3 pages, right? Twitter at DSOtis. I'm also on Facebook. Personal website, danielotis.ca, has all my stories. Or if you want to read all my stuff, find my Vice contributor page. If you find my Vice contributor page, all my reporting on the subjects there, going back to April 2021, when I first started getting into it. And that's where you can find me. And if you have any good Canadian documents, reports, things like that, all my website, Twitter, email addresses there. My direct messages are always open. Shoot me a line. Love to see what you have. And if I use it in a story, full credit to you.
There you go. Awesome. Well, thank you, Daniel Otis. We'll see you soon, my friend. I'm assuming sooner than later, because I hope this next article that you come out, I got to talk to you behind the scenes. Let's do an interview with both of you, if he's that open, But like, it would be cool. It would be great. Look, if there was one ask that I would have for you to put on him, is, hey, the more you talk about this, the more folks like you are gonna feel less afraid to come out and tell their stories. I think it encourages people, it inspires people, and it helps kill the stigma. So that would be the only thing. And if he doesn't come on the show, he goes on 20 other shows. Great, awesome. I don't care where he goes, just as long as he talks about it and talks about it frequently.
I'll be the little birdie in his ear. I think
I appreciate it.
Let's get the story out there, and once it hits the finish line, I think. I imagine this person could be receptive. Who knows? I don't know. I'll talk.
Yeah, knock on wood. All right, Daniel Otis, we'll get out of here. Go enjoy your poutine. We'll see you later.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
take care.
Thank you, Daniel.
That was great. Always a great conversation with that gentleman.
Yeah, I love. Always great to have new UFO news, and thanks for Daniel for
new UFO data.
UFO reports, UFO real stuff.
Yeah,
it's great. It's gonna take me a while. I need to go back and digest all of those 290 pages.
It's a lot.
Okay. I'm curious. Well, I don't know if we'd talk about UFOs or boot UAP. I wonder. I didn't get to ask him. Like, do they even know the term UAP in Canada? Do they use it there? Like, I'm curious of what the culture is in Canada. Like, I know it's a smaller population, but just like per capita, do they have UFO meetups? So I was kind of curious about the experiencer thing. Like, I wonder if that's even. I mean, I know Chrissy And I know Daniel, but I don't think I know many Canadian researchers. I don't hear from witnesses. So
Yeah, I mean, well, there's Chris Witkowski, who he mentioned in the article and on the show. I think it's they don't. I mean, their Air Force and their military is nothing compared to ours. So they don't have as many top secret aircraft flying around their provinces as at the rate that we have secret and not secret aircraft flying over our continent. I think it's just a numbers thing, and I don't think, look, there's never been a version of Lou Elizondo within the Canadian government, sort of leading the way on, hey, we're not calling these UFOs anymore, we're calling them UAPs. If I had to take a guess, I would assume they use UFOs. I mean, in his article, he uses the acronym UFO.
Yeah, I noticed he was mentioned that in the when he was talking, he used UFOs usually, and yeah. So it hasn't quite made it. The term hasn't quite made it around.
Yeah,
maybe very far yet.
I get the sense that there's a little bit of a cat and mouse game in America with, people like John Greenwald doing their FOIA requests for all different types of terms, and the government's trying to respond to that and changing what they're calling things, whereas they seem to have a little bit more openness, probably due to the reasons that Lou you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and look, there's I'm curious to know, do you remember the name of the politician in Canada that came out and said it? I don't know if he said his name, but if he's got a Twitter handle, we should be hitting him up and again thanking him for coming out.
Yeah, I wonder if it was Matt Green who JJ.
No, well, Matt Green. No, he hadn't heard of Matt Green. He wrote down his name and was going to reach out to Matt Green. But I'll hit him up in a message. I don't think he gave us his name, but if he's got a Twitter handle, that's just another person that we can go out and say thank you to. Just thank you for bringing the topic up. Thank you for pursuing it. And thank you for not ridiculing it. You folks like you're helping break the stigma. And by the way, this is what we want. We want you to do more of this. So, yesterday, Grant Levac on his first episode of the Unexplained Rundown had a really wonderful exchange between an Australian senator, I believe the parliament or the committee, I'm not sure
whatever they call them down
under, and it's a really cool exchange. And that's someone I think we might have a shot at getting an Australian senator on the show. Who knows? But the way the questions he was asking were so great, and the response he got was, some chuckles and I mean, do you think in that clip, you were there rather, do you think those his colleagues were taking it seriously as he was asking these questions? I felt like they were, but they were also very unknowledgeable. I think more.
I mean, it starts with asking questions, right? And I think probably whenever any of us first heard of a lot of this stuff, we were a little bit apprehensive. It takes a little while to, get the seriousness of it to kind of sink in. But man, I applaud Grant for, engaging with his politicians and, helping to get that conversation started there. That's huge. It does seem like other governments are more receptive to talking about this and actually opening up their files and telling us potentially the truth than the American government is. So, yeah, I applaud Daniel, Grant.
I mean, if we can't get it from our own government, there's no damn reason why we can't solicit other governments and try to get them to do it. All these politicians, I don't care where they are in the world, most of them have Twitter handles, because they like social media. They like the attention, especially when people are supporting them. But yeah, Jane, did you have a thought?
Well, that might get the U.S. politicians more into it. Like, okay, well, if you guys aren't going to listen, I guess we'll go see if Canada wants to do disclosure, right? And then it might, hey.
You might get a little jelly, little FOMO.
Yeah, I like that. I like that
a little
approach.
Fear of missing out. Yeah, I'm sure as hell doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt the conversation. I think it's also encouraging, that if you see a senator come out and talk about this, that it's I think other politicians could see and say to themselves, oh, his career's not over. Like nobody, strung him by the bootstraps on this hot take of his about UFOs. Oh, okay. Well, maybe I could talk about it since I'm on the Senate Intelligence Committee or whatever committee I sit on. Look at again. Like I love looking at Senator Gillibrand's Twitter feed because, man, she posts stuff all the time, and I get more likes on some of the stuff and she's a senator. But when she tweets about UFOs, holy Toledo, man, it is a sea change in the interaction. And I think if she was smart politically, she would use the popularity of the UFO discussion to push other parts of her agenda.
I mean,
like it wouldn't hurt.
I'm guessing is that maybe not what she is intending to do, but
well, if she was really intending to do it, I think she'd be tweeting about it every day.
Yeah,
every day. Hey, by the way, this is what happened in the office today. This is what I heard, or whatever. And oh, by the way, here's a really important, law or thing that I'm also trying to pass. If you guys can help support me with that, like she's not asking us specifically to help.
Maybe she's not playing the cards right. Then maybe she's not. Maybe she's kind of half.
Well, I think she's dipping her toe. She's dipping her toe in the water. I just think if there was somebody,
is that effective to just dip your toe in the water?
Well, that's what I mean.
Right?
What I'm saying is that I think if she had someone on her staff or she was a little bit more politically savvy, that she would see that the popularity of her when she talks about this goes through the roof. And so if every day she can even give us a 1-sentence update on what she heard or what she did for the topic, and then follow it up with like, hey, I'm also trying to get this done, you guys. I need your help with this legislation.
And what does she have to lose?
Nothing.
I know that, because what does she have to lose, really? Because if, let's say that skyrocketed her influence and the awareness of who she is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
it absolutely
would. She not have more influence, which is
that's what I'm saying.
Ultimately, as a senator, and
that's what I'm saying. I feel like there's going to be a politician.
You're going to have more interviews. You're
yes.
definitely, you're much more likely to end up on TV much more often if you tweet about this every day, even if it's a joke headline. And at this point, nothing's been proven or not proven yet. So this is a window of time where you could get away with it, right? And it really isn't a laughing matter. I mean, you're going off of more credible military sources and pilots in this window. So, if different senators are listening, I think that is a smart strategy.
I think it is too, but rather, did you have a counterpoint to that?
I mean, I agree on some level, but I think that it is also somewhat risky as well, because there still is a stigma out there, and I think that by people like Gillibrand even addressing it at all does wonders for killing the stigma on all levels of society. But like now when we're in a potential war with Ukraine and Russia, I could see there potentially being some blowback if Christian Gillibrand is focusing on UFOs.
Timing's
and stuff. So
I think timing would have to be part of
that's
that.
True.
Yeah. But even that, it's like, look, it doesn't have to be sensational. It could be something as simple as, hey, today in the Senate Intelligence Committee, I brought up the topic of UAP. They were very receptive. More to come later. And by the way, blah, 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 whatever the next agenda is, whether that is something from the Ukraine or whatever. I think it's just make it part of your agenda, part of your. I talk about this all the time, no matter what's happening, and then normalize it. And I think it's like, I don't think people will, and of course, if there's an outbreak of World War III, maybe don't tweet about the UFO thing for a couple of days, but keep it grounded, keep it simple, and just give people little updates like that would go tremendously far in not only winning influence, winning more followers, winning, the American people, more trust. You'd get more trust because you're being honest about something. Gary Voorhees in the house with a $5 donation. What's up, Gary? Get in, buddy. He's got all shaved up. He wasn't feeling good for a couple weeks, but it's nice to see that you're all cleaned up, buddy. You look good.
See you, Gary.
He's got a beard I wish I could grow.
How about that World War? I want to say it. Implication. And think about it. We were just talking to Daniel Otis about the origin of really the UFO cover-up. We always talk about the Cold War. It's like that World War II. I mean, how about the timing? These two UFO offices, and now we have, Russia, Ukraine. What do you guys think these politics are going to do to the disclosure conversation? Is it going to lock it down more? Is it going to be just oddly convenient because you can describe certain things that you're seeing in the sky as potentially alien when maybe they're not?
That's a good question. A lot of people are kind of speculating that we might be going into another kind of Cold War type atmosphere with Russia, which I think if that happened, it's probably bad for disclosure, because there's a lot of theories that, the Cold War is kind of what kept the government wanting to keep things secret, because I thought it might be Russia and it might be, something else. So,
but would it be comforting? Are we in a new age though, or we would rather it be an alien in the sky instead of Russia, right? Because I think a lot of the triangle cases I've covered over the years have been military and almost seem to be in a firefight. And I think that's not very comforting that could be going over your head. So is it a new convenient explanation, go-to explanation that people could have rather than Russia or China or the US or, yeah. Mm-hmm.
In that case, would you be super proposing that maybe some actual military sightings would get
so
whitewashed?
Let's say there's a military craft that flies over Russia or Ukraine or here, and hey, it's an ET, let's do a CE5 event, versus, oh my gosh, World War III is going on right now, and that could be any country, and that could be a spy, right?
And I don't want that to be true, but it does make some sense.
Well, I don't see any other reason for all of the reporting if there isn't some kind of foreign military reason or advantage, and thought what's the word I'm looking through? Kind of thinking through different scenarios, like war scenarios, and how will these reports play into that? And I feel like every time you release anything to the American citizens in the news or in a report, you're also releasing it to all of your foreign adversaries. So I think it has to have been a consideration in all of this disclosure. And now that this is all happening, it definitely, it matches up a lot more, even more to me than it did before.
Well, this question that was that's been, there's somebody, Jonathan Lindy on Twitter had linked an article from defense1.com asking where are all these Russian drones that they're claiming that they could be in these reports, right? Because we get it all the time. What are these swarms showing up over U.S. military fleets? Oh, it's Chinese drones. It's Russian drones. So here we are in the middle of a very tense fight between two countries, and the smaller country in a lot of ways is kind of wiping the floor with the Russian military. But the question then becomes, well, where are all these drones? Where's all this drone tech that Russia has? Shouldn't they be using it in Syria right now to get a tactical advantage on what's happening? And, basically saying that if Russia can't defend against Giulio models with bombs, it isn't manufacturing UAP. Like, it's not manufacturing these drones that are displaying any one of these 5 observables, let alone having the flight times and the capabilities of going as far as they've been seen within our U.S. airspace and borders as far as the ocean is concerned. Now, could these things be being launched from within the United States? Sure. Or cargo ships? Absolutely. But why aren't they being seen then in the Ukraine? I think it's a good question. What do you think, Rather? Your face is quite blank. You don't have a good answer for it.
Maybe they are being.
I think we just stub Rather. We just figured out the
nebulous
drone
topic, though, right?
Issue?
Because there are like the Nimitz Tic Tac event. Clearly that's not Russian technology based on what we've been seeing, but there's a lot of these other things like the Roosevelt encounter where we don't really know what was going on there, and a lot of the things that come out do look like kind of low-tech drones, which could very well be Russian technology. Just because they're not successful in war doesn't mean they don't have scrappy things to get data out of us. So I think that it's a really complex topic because all of these things could be true, right?
Right. So that's kind of what I was saying. So let's say you've got a certain amount of percentage that are not military, right? Let's just put that aside. In an environment right now, where people are hyper aware, or certain people on UFO Twitter, UAP Twitter are hyper aware of UFOs and UAP. You have 2 UFO offices. Now you're looking at all the anomalous lights and events in the sky with that as an added bucket. And I'm just saying that might be like the opposite of War of the Worlds, where it's actually comforting because people are now talking about their experiences, and maybe the Greys are friendly and UFOs aren't a big deal, and right. So that's sort of what I was getting at. Not that the Tic Tac UFO necessarily is military. I mean, you guys know me. I'm like still out trying to figure out the Roswell. So I think they're out there, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that is a very plausible case where maybe there's Chinese or Russian drones that are buzzing our military, and if the public knew that, we'd be all clamoring to react to that, but the military doesn't want to react for some reason, so they tell the public that they're UFOs so that we don't get outraged. I think that doesn't mean that real UFOs don't exist, but it's a disturbing possibility.
Yeah, I just figured if they, and I think it's it's still a good point. Like if they had all of this wonderful drone tech, we would be seeing this especially if they're losing aspects of the war. Like Russia should not be losing any aspect of this ground war, like at all. They should be able to roll right in and do whatever they want over a small country like Ukraine. And the fact that they're putting up such a great fight, and God bless them, and I hope they continue to do it. I hope it becomes to a point where it's not financially sustainable and it forces Russia to pull back and it makes him look like an idiot. And all these, this is not good for him. This is not good for business for him because he's pissing off his oligarchs. One of their oligarchs just lost a major soccer franchise because of the sanctions that have been put on the Russian economy. This is not going to end well for him, which is great. I hope somebody comes in but then again, that could be a whole nother mess. Anyway, my point is, if they were using these drones on us, we'd be seeing them in the theater of war on some level. Correct. And we're not. Yeah. We're just not.
Are we seeing any? Have you guys seen any footage besides news reporters? I will say, when it comes to tracking UFOs or anomalous sightings in other countries and places, it's really difficult. I don't cover worldwide cases anymore. I think I covered some pretty cool cases in the Ukraine, way back in the day. And so I guarantee you, if people are seeing weird stuff, we're probably not going to know about it. Unless you're following that. I mean, they're probably not going to post on Instagram right now. Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind. The blackout of citizen UFO reporting in a place like Ukraine right now, I wouldn't expect.
No, but I would expect if the drone tech was being used, I would expect mainstream media to have caught wind of it.
That's right.
Footage of it, and reported on it. Especially if it was a tactical advantage for Russia. I think that'd be something that, absolutely. Look at these Russian drones.
I guess what I'm saying, those things can be real sneaky, especially at night. I remember one of my favorite, not favorite cases was Elon Musk's unmanned rocket that exploded, and there was an object that hit it, and that got no coverage whatsoever, and that was live. It got no mainstream coverage whatsoever, even though he acknowledged it on Twitter. that they were exploring the drone, or actually UFO theory, but it looked like a drone.
Yeah.
So I would just say those are sneaky. They're sneaky, and I wouldn't guarantee that it's going to be really obvious on some of the
that's fair
footage we've seen. So
that's fair.
But I'm just trying to log in and MUFON to see if there's any cases out of the Ukraine. I'll let you guys know.
There's a couple of comments here for Rather. The first is from Amanda Rose, who says, "I've always been curious what Rather's real name is. Not sure if it's been said or if it's still a mystery. My guess is Brian." Oh man, I can tell you, Amanda Rose, you're in the right ballpark, but you're in the nosebleeds. Yeah.
I do have a real name.
Brian is a good guess. And then Awaiting Alien says, "Rather is a mystery." I love this comment from J. Allen Hynek. "Yeah, not working for me either. Super frustrating. I was trying to send a 10K super chat." You might want to check out the Patreon, J. Allen Hynek, and that way it doesn't freeze up on you. But yeah, I've had where super chats, like if you put a double space between words, it won't send it, and it's sometimes hard to catch why it's not sending, or your message is just too long.
Someone had this problem, I think, on Friday, and someone in the chat noted that maybe they had a Russian bank. So there's always that possibility.
Oh, wow. Yeah. God. Are the sanctions affecting this show?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. That would be awful. Laura Campbell says, "Rather, please sit next to John Alexander at the SCU conference and give a report." Are you officially going to the SCU conference, Rather?
Yeah, I'm going. That'll be a hell of a
Yeah,
time. I'll try to sniff out John Alexander too.
Yeah, hell yes, you heard it here, guys. It's official.
Rather be road tripping
to Alabama for the SCU conference.
I think I'll take a plane. That might be a long road
Rather
trip.
be
But
flying.
Yeah, that's all right. Fair. But you know what we're saying. Rather on the road.
Yeah.
Rather on the road. That's probably better. All right, you guys. Well, let's get out of here. It's been a fun show. Jane, what are you working on this week? I know you just released a video with McClellan last week.
Finally, and I misspelled his name in the thumbnail. I was updating it during the show.
You finally get the McClellan show.
I believe it.
What are you doing, Jane?
No, it's that episode. I mean, the interviews are great, but it was just a curse. It's just one of those just cursed episodes. So finally got it out, and hopefully we'll get the momentum back. I think there'll be something in between, but next Thursday or Friday, still trying to work it out with Jess. We will be doing Weird Hollywood, and we're going to be talking They Live. So right now, Jason McClellan and then Ian Crossland, got 2 interviews with them. Really 2 different viewpoint sides of the coins. I think that's kind of fun to like juxtaposition it, though I didn't do it on purpose. And Weird Hollywood next week. We'll talk They Live, which is, I mean, that's
a good one. That's a damn good one.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite. Yeah. I honestly think I'm not usually look, I'll take that back. I didn't even say anything. Why am I taking it back? I used to believe that remakes were a waste of time. But now I feel like remakes could be very valuable. That is one movie that is dying for a remake. Dying for a remake. That and Flight of the Navigator, which I think actually got picked up. I think they're going to be doing a series on either one of those 2. I can't remember exactly what I heard in the entertainment news world, but one of those is getting remade. And so that I love that flick. Absolutely love that flick. Rather, what do you got?
Man, I'm still recovering from the lost hour during this weekend. That's my excuse for not getting anything done. But they're going to have hopefully a video on UFO logic.
Daylight. How about we bring some clarity? Maybe we should add daylight savings, the end of daylight savings time in the Big Phone Home 3. That could maybe get some mainstream following. I think it might get a little more attention if we actually include that in part of our grassroots movement. Let's also, by the way, if you guys can also put it in your hearts to end, daylight savings time.
There's a word for that.
It was just an hour zero cool.
Where you pack, like you negotiate, right? And you pack different I don't know what the
Pack
word
different
is.
things.
Somebody
Yeah.
knows.
Well, no, it's just like Congress does when they want
Yeah.
$10 billion. They ask for 15 and they get 7, which is actually what they really needed. You know, like it's a game. So yes, definitely. I think we could slip it in there in one of the one of our templates that we send out. But you guys, this was a fun show. Thank you guys for being here. Want to say thank you to DOS Tapes. Want to say thank you to the moderators. Don't forget to check out our Patreon links and ways you can support financially. We are a public access channel. We're supported by viewers like you. So every dollar you can send us absolutely helps. We're going to be buying the tickets for Rather going to the SCU conference. Not his plane ticket. He's covering that. But we're going to buy the ticket for him to get in. So things like that. Fun stuff that we're going to be doing here down the road. So it all goes towards that. Truly appreciate it. And if you can't, don't sweat it. There's nothing hidden behind a paywall here. Everything is free as soon as we create it. So enjoy your leisure. Just give us a like, a share, subscribe. Come back when we do live shows. It's always fun. Thank you guys for the questions. Thank you to my moderators. Check out the links for Daniel Otis, for Rather Be Squidding, for Jane, Kyle, UFO Jane in the description below. And that's it, you guys. Thank you all so much for coming aboard, getting weird with us here on another episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review, your home for credible news, reviews, and commentary on everything UAP and UFO. Until next time, you guys, stay safe out there. We love you all. Peace.
News 12 Sports with Pat Murphy.
Great news regarding Bills tight end Kevin Everett. He moved his arms and legs today. And doctors now believe that's the wrong video, by the way. That is not the right video.
I'm going to tell you all right now, all of these wonderful people would not be here without Patreon supporters like you. If you enjoy credible news, reviews, and commentary on UFOs and UAPs 5 days a week, you want to support this show. What's your name? Marty. Marty, look how easy this is, Marty. Pick up your phone. Boom! You're a Patreon member. I mean, look, it's so easy. You just click the link, which is right here. Just for $1 a month, you can support this show. Just fill out the information and pledge what's comfortable for you. It could be $1, $5, $10, or who knows. Just support.